Have you ever walked through a park and been hit with a wave of nostalgia, as if the world around you suddenly stops and time rewinds? Imagine turning a corner, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, only to come face to face with someone you never thought you'd see again. Someone you once loved, someone who once meant everything to you. What would you do if you found them again, not in the life you imagined for them, but in a way you never could have predicted? Park Bo-gum was just looking for a peaceful afternoon walk in the park. He had been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately with work and all the demands of his career. The park was quiet and green, a place where he could escape the noise of the city for a while, clear his mind, and enjoy a few moments of solitude. It was his way of recharging, finding a small moment of peace in the chaos of his life. But as he walked through the familiar paths, the trees overhead casting gentle shadows on the ground, he noticed something, a figure sitting on a bench just ahead. There was something familiar about them, but he couldn't quite place it. As he walked closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was her. His first love. The girl he hadn't seen in years, not since they had parted ways so suddenly and without real closure. The years had passed, and they had both moved on, or so he thought. But now, there she was, sitting on the same park bench where they had once spent so many afternoons together. Her eyes were fixed on something ahead, and she seemed lost in thought, unaware of his presence. Park Bo-gum stopped in his tracks, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even thought about her in so long, and yet now she was standing in front of him, or sitting, rather, as if no time had passed at all. It felt like a dream, something he had never imagined could actually happen. What was she doing here? How had they ended up in the same place at the same time? For a long moment, he just stood there, watching her, unsure of what to do. Should he approach her? Should he say something? His heart was pounding in his chest, a mix of excitement, nervousness, and a strange kind of sadness. So much had changed since they had last spoken. He was a different person now, and so was she, no doubt. Without thinking, he took a few steps forward. His feet felt heavy, as though they were carrying him against his will. He wanted to speak, but no words came. He wasn't sure what to say, or if she would even recognize him. After all, so much time had passed. They had both changed in ways that were impossible to predict. But then, as if she had sensed his presence, she turned her head. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. It was as if time had stopped. The park, the people walking by, the noise of the city, all of it disappeared. It was just the two of them, locked in a gaze that said everything and nothing all at once. Park Bo-gum, she asked, her voice hesitant, as though she couldn't quite believe her own eyes. He stood frozen, his heart racing, his breath caught in his chest. He couldn't find the words. How could he? After all this time, after everything that had happened, here they were, standing face to face again, as if no years had passed at all. "Is it really you?" he managed to say, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and emotion. She stood up slowly, as if unsure of what to do, as if she needed to make sure that what was happening was real. The two of them stood there, just looking at each other, as if trying to process the moment. It was surreal, and yet, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They had shared so much in the past, and now, here they were again, as if fate had brought them together. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Park Bo-gum nodded slowly, still trying to comprehend the situation. "I didn't think I would either." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of the past hanging in the air. They both knew that the years apart had changed them, had shaped them into different people. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they had found each other again, and what came next was anyone's guess. The silence between them hung in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though they were both waiting, trying to find the right words to bridge the gap that had formed between them over the years. Park Bo-gum's heart was racing, and his thoughts were a whirlwind. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to say, but he couldn't seem to find a way to express them. How could he? It had been years since they last spoke, and so much had happened in that time. "I didn't think you'd be here," Park Bo-gum finally said, his voice a little shaky, as he stepped closer to her. How did you end up here? What happened?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else, something he couldn't quite place. It was a look he remembered from their past, when they had been so close, when everything felt like it had a purpose. But now, there was a distance, a wall between them that hadn't been there before. I never expected this either, she said, her voice low. Life just happens, doesn't it? We think we know where we're going, but sometimes, things just take us somewhere else. Park Bo-gum took a step closer, unable to hide the concern in his voice. What do you mean? You've changed. What happened to you? I thought we were going to build something together. We had plans, remember? We were supposed to be something. She looked away, and for a moment, he thought she might not answer. But then, she turned back to him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet determination. I thought that too, she said softly, her voice filled with regret. But I lost my way. I thought I could handle it all. But somewhere along the line, I made decisions that I can't take back. I tried to find my way again, but I felt like I was drowning. I thought about you all the time, Park Bo-gum. You were the only person who ever made me feel safe. But I pushed you away because I didn't know how to make things right. Park Bo-gum's chest tightened as he listened to her words. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. He had always known that something had happened to her, something that caused her to change, to distance herself from him. But hearing it from her now, after all this time, was different. It was as if a weight he didn't know he was carrying had been lifted, and he finally understood what had driven them apart. I never wanted to leave you, she continued, her voice trembling. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to be the person you needed me to be. Park Bo-gum reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You don't have to be perfect, he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. I never expected you to be perfect. I just wanted us to be together. We can figure this out. I know we can. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both pain and hope. Do you really think we can? After all this time, after everything that's happened? Park Bo-gum nodded, squeezing her hand gently. I do. We can start again, one step at a time. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, her hand in his, as though weighing his words. Finally, she let out a deep breath and nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I'm not sure where to start, she said, her voice quieter now, but with a hint of determination. But I'm willing to try. I don't want to keep living in the past anymore. I don't want to keep running away from what we had. Park Bo-gum's heart swelled as he looked at her. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment when they could finally begin to heal, to rebuild the connection they once shared. It wouldn't be easy, and it would take time, but it was a start. Then let's do it, he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We'll take it one step at a time. Together. She nodded, her eyes brightening, as though the possibility of starting over had finally clicked. Together, she repeated, her voice filled with quiet hope. They stood there, hand in hand, looking at each other with a new understanding. It wasn't about trying to recreate the past, it was about creating something new, something stronger. Whatever had happened between them, whatever had caused the years of separation, was in the past. The future was what mattered now, and they were ready to face it together. The evening sky began to darken, and the park around them grew quieter, the sounds of the city distant but ever present. But in that moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, as if time had slowed down just for them. We'll take it slow, Park Bo-gum said, his voice steady. We don't have to rush anything. But I promise I'll be here for you. Every step of the way. She smiled, her eyes soft with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his hand. And with that, they began walking through the park together, side by side, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs to travel. As the days turned into weeks, Park Bo-gum and she found themselves walking down a path they had both never expected to walk. The days were filled with new beginnings, new hopes, and, most importantly, new understanding. They spent hours talking about their past, revisiting memories, and acknowledging the pain they had both carried for so long. The road to healing was long, but with each step, they grew closer. They learned how to be patient with each other, to listen more deeply, and to support each other as they navigated the complexities of their shared history. One afternoon, they decided to visit a local cafe they used to frequent together. It was a place filled with memories, and it seemed like the perfect spot for them to continue their conversation, to take the next step in their journey. As they sat down at a small table by the window, the warmth of the cafe enveloped them, and the world outside seemed to fade away. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said softly, looking out the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "This place holds so many memories. Good ones, bad ones." Park Bo-gum nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "It is strange," he agreed, his voice full of nostalgia. "But maybe it's the right place to start again. To remember who we were, but also to see who we are now. We've changed, but maybe that's okay." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I think I've been holding on to the past for too long," she admitted, her voice quiet but filled with honesty. "I've been trying to fix things that can't be fixed. But maybe it's time to let go of the past and make room for something new." Park Bo-gum reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "I don't think you need to let go of everything. The past made us who we are today. But we don't have to stay stuck in it. We can move forward, together." She smiled at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was beginning to truly understand what he meant. The past wasn't something they could erase, but it didn't have to define their future. Together, they could shape the life ahead of them, and it was something worth fighting for. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice full of resolve. "I'm ready to see where we can go from here. No more looking back." Park Bo-gum squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with affection. "I'm ready too. And I'll be with you every step of the way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soft hum of the cafe providing the perfect background to their thoughts. For the first time, there was no pressure, no fear of the unknown. There was only a sense of peace, a sense that whatever the future held, they would face it together. After a while, they finished their coffee and stepped out into the crisp air of the afternoon. The streets were busy, as usual, but everything felt different now. The weight of the past no longer loomed over them. They had found a way to move forward, and that was all that mattered. As they walked through the city, Park Bo-gum couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. He had spent so many years wondering what had happened, wondering if they had missed their chance. But now, standing beside her, he realized that it wasn't too late. There was always time for new beginnings, for second chances, and for the kind of love that was built on understanding and growth. They walked in silence, their steps in sync, each of them lost in their own thoughts but content to simply be in each other's company. It was a quiet kind of happiness, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew they were ready to face it, together. "So," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "what do we do now?" Park Bo-gum smiled at her, his heart full of warmth. "Now, we take it one step at a time. We keep going, and we make the most of every moment." She laughed softly, the sound light and easy, as though the weight of the years had lifted from her shoulders. "I think I can handle that." They continued walking, side by side, with no destination in mind, just the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. As the weeks continued to pass, Park Bo-gum and she found their relationship evolving into something new, something deeper. They spent more time together, rediscovering the things that once brought them joy and shared experiences they had never fully explored when they were younger. They found comfort in each other's company, and as they spent more time together, they realized how much they had missed out on by letting time slip between them. One evening, they decided to take a walk in the park again, a place that had become symbolic of their new beginning. The park was quiet, and the evening sky was tinged with the soft pink and orange hues of the setting sun. As they walked side by side, they didn't say much, but the silence between them was comfortable. It was as if words weren't necessary anymore. "You know," she said after a while, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said before about starting fresh, one step at a time." Park Bo-gum glanced at her, waiting for her to continue. What have you been thinking? She looked ahead, her gaze distant, as though she were searching for the right words. I think I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid of failing, afraid of going back to where we were, or even worse, losing everything again. But I realize now that I can't live like that anymore. I have to trust again. I have to trust myself, and I have to trust you. Park Bo-gum's heart swelled at her words. He had always known that trust was something they both needed to rebuild, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel real, made it feel like they were truly starting anew. I understand, he said softly. And I'm here for you, every step of the way. I know we can make it, but we have to keep trusting in each other, and in what we're building. She stopped walking, turning to face him with a soft smile. I believe in us, she said quietly. I believe in what we have. I think we can make this work, no matter what happens. Park Bo-gum smiled back at her, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in years. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. I do too, he replied. And I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. They stood there for a moment, their hands intertwined, the world around them fading into the background. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if everything had come full circle. They had started this journey with so many questions, so many uncertainties, but now they had found their rhythm. They knew what they wanted, and more importantly, they knew they had each other. After a few moments of quiet contemplation, they resumed their walk, side by side, no longer worried about what the future would hold. They had learned that they couldn't control everything, but they could control how they moved forward. And they had chosen to move forward together. As they walked, they talked more about their dreams, what they wanted from life, where they saw themselves in the future. They had spent so many years wondering about what could have been, but now, they were focused on what could be, what they could build. Together. Later that evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the park, Park Bo-gum turned to her with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about our past, he said softly, his voice full of emotion. And how much I regret not trying harder to make things work. But I also realize that the past is behind us. We can't change it. We can only move forward, and I'm so grateful to have you by my side now. She looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and love. I feel the same way, she said quietly. I've always regretted letting us drift apart, but I've also learned that it's never too late to start again. And I'm glad we're doing that now. They sat there for a while, taking in the peaceful silence of the park, the night settling around them. In that moment, they both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. They were ready to build the life they had once dreamed of, one step at a time. I don't know what's ahead for us, she said softly, her voice full of hope, but I'm not afraid anymore. Park Bo-gum smiled, his heart full. Neither am I, whatever comes, we'll face it together. They stood up and walked hand in hand, the city lights twinkling in the distance, their hearts full of promise. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey they were on together, and they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it, side by side. As the days continued to pass, Park Bo-gum and she found themselves growing more comfortable with each other. Their bond deepened, built on the foundation of their shared history, their understanding, and their willingness to let go of the past in order to build something stronger. With every conversation, they learned more about each other, the things that had shaped their lives, the mistakes they had made, and the lessons they had learned along the way. One evening, as they sat in a cozy cafe near the park, the same place where they had first started to reconnect, Park Bo-gum looked at her with a soft smile. It was clear to him now, this was not just about rediscovering old love. This was about creating a new kind of love, one based on the truth of who they were, not the people they used to be. I've been thinking, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. About everything we've been through. About the distance, the time apart. And I realized that maybe it wasn't all bad. Maybe the time apart gave us the space we needed to grow, to learn, to become the people we are now. She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. I used to think that if we'd stayed together, everything would have been perfect, she said quietly. But now, I see that it wasn't about perfection. It was about learning from what happened, about becoming better, stronger versions of ourselves. And now, we can finally be together, not as the people we once were, but as who we are now. Park Bo-gum reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Exactly, he said, his voice full of certainty. We're not who we were before, and that's okay. We've both changed, but that doesn't mean we can't build something even better than what we had. What matters is that we're here now, and we're ready to see where this journey takes us. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt at peace. They were starting fresh, but they weren't starting from scratch. They were building on the lessons they had learned, the pain they had both endured, and the strength they had found in each other. I'm glad we're doing this, she said softly. I'm glad we're giving ourselves a chance, giving us a chance. I am too, Park Bo-gum replied, his heart full. I never stopped thinking about you, even when we were apart. And now that we're here, together, I know that we're exactly where we're meant to be. They sat there for a while, their hands intertwined, lost in the quiet understanding that had grown between them. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping promises. It was about the simple truth that they had both found something worth fighting for, something worth holding on to. As the evening wore on, they left the cafe and decided to take another walk in the park. The cool evening air was refreshing, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. They walked side by side, not needing to speak, just enjoying the shared silence, the quiet companionship that had always been at the heart of their connection. I used to be so scared of what might happen, she said after a long pause. I was scared of opening up again, scared of losing myself, scared of losing you. But now, I realized that fear was holding me back. And I'm done being afraid. Park Bo-gum looked at her, his heart swelling with admiration. You don't need to be afraid anymore, he said softly. Not with me. I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Her eyes filled with tears, but these were not tears of sadness. These were tears of relief, of hope, and of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for waiting for me to find my way. I never gave up on you, he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. And I'll never stop believing in us. They continued walking, the silence between them comfortable, knowing that the future was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it, whatever it might bring. They had spent so many years apart, but now, they were finding their way back to each other, step by step, heart by heart. I don't know what's next, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. But I know that whatever it is, we'll face it together. Park Bo-gum smiled at her, his eyes filled with warmth. Together, he repeated softly, his voice filled with certainty. And in that moment, he knew that this was just the beginning of something new, something beautiful, and something worth fighting for. The days continued to unfold in their own rhythm, and each day brought them closer. As the weeks passed, they found themselves building a new life, one step at a time, grounded in trust, understanding, and a shared vision of the future. Park Bo-gum and she no longer saw the past as something to regret, instead, it became a source of wisdom, a reminder of how far they had come. Together, they embraced what was ahead, knowing that their connection was unique, and that they had earned this second chance. One evening, they sat together at the same park bench where they had first reconnected. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. It was one of those quiet moments when everything felt perfect, when time seemed to slow down, and they could simply enjoy being in each other's company. Do you ever think about the past? She asked, breaking the silence, her voice gentle. Park Bo-gum glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. I do, he said, his voice filled with thoughtfulness. But not in the way I used to. I used to wonder what went wrong, what I could have done differently. But now, I think about it with a sense of gratitude. Because if we hadn't gone through what we did, we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't be who we are. Her eyes softened as she listened to him, and for the first time, she truly understood what he meant. I used to think that we had lost our chance, she admitted quietly. But now I see that maybe we didn't lose anything. We just had to go through our own journeys to get here. And now, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Park Bo-gum took her hand in his touch gentle but steady. You're right. We're exactly where we need to be. And no matter what happens next, I know we'll be okay. We've already come so far. She smiled, the warmth of his words wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. I'm glad we found each other again, she said softly, her voice full of emotion. I don't think I could have made it without you. Park Bo-gum's heart swelled with affection, and he gently lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered. We're in this together. They sat there, their hands intertwined, watching as the sun sank lower into the horizon. It was a peaceful, quiet moment, but it was also filled with so much meaning. They had both been through so much, and yet, they had found their way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, they both felt like they had everything they needed to face whatever came next. I don't know what the future holds, she said after a while, her voice thoughtful, but I'm not afraid anymore. I know that whatever happens, we'll handle it together. Park Bo-gum smiled at her, his heart full of love and gratitude. I'm not afraid either, he said softly. As long as we have each other, we'll face it together. They sat there for a while longer, their hearts in sync, knowing that the road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but it was one they would walk together. They had been given a second chance, and they were going to make the most of it. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood up from the bench, hand in hand, ready to face the world together. They didn't need to have all the answers, they just needed to trust in each other and in the love they had rebuilt. And as they walked side by side, Park Bo-gum knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of something new, something real, something worth fighting for. They had both been lost, but now, they had found each other again, and together, they were stronger than ever. If you've made it this far, type a new chapter in the comments.